around 6 years ago, we were all in fear. We were all in some kind of bewilderment because the world was battling against a single enemy, the coronavirus. And the COVID 19 pandemic touched all our lives. And so many families they faced so many challenges and tragedies. And I think many of us sitting here in this room would have also kind of, would be actually having some kind of distressing memory of that period, a period that took away maybe a neighbor, a friend, a family, a relative, a beloved family member. And to be able to, this forget this carnage of COVID. Like we all want this memory to be wiped off. But to some extent, perhaps Andalip doesn't, because she told me that she doesn't quite believe in this concept of so-called moving on. And she chose to give a language to her grief. And it was very kind of bold of her, I would say, because she lost two of her favorite people, her husband Mansoor and her mother-in-law, within 5 days, span of 5 days. And all this while, even she herself was, and her son, both of them got COVID, they were admitted and they were recovering. So you can imagine the intensity of her grief, the magnitude of her grief. And she chose to kind of chronicle this enormous grief in this book, Learning to Make Tea for One, which is, as it is, a very telling title and very direct. And so it is also kind of, after I read the book, it's also kind of self introspection, self reflection. And I would really like to ask Andalib, like, what actually triggered the book? Like, how and when you decided, at what stage of grief you were in, what did you see, and what did you learn?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Warm Saturday afternoon. Thank you, Hindu Lit for Life, for inviting me. Since Shoma asked me this question about what prompted me to write, I think a lot of people also wanted to know. My family didn't know that I was writing this book until just before it was published. I hadn't told anyone, mostly because I couldn't explain what I was writing. I've been writing a lot of fiction all my life, and so to write something so personal was not easy, and I didn't have the words to describe why I wrote it. So I just want to read out a little bit from the book, and hopefully our mics will be ready by then so we can have like a conversation. Um, it's something to do with what we talked about yesterday. Okay. I wondered what the doctors made of Mansoor. When he was in the COVID ward, he had made quite the impression as the patient who wouldn't eat the food the hospital served. I had been bemused when I visited him the first time, and every nurse and doctor I met wanted me to convince him to eat better and to try and focus on getting better. Given the chaos surrounding the second wave, I don't think they had time to look at him as anyone other than a patient. He was one of the many people who had come here from the COVID ward, and that was it. There, they certainly could not see him as a person with a personality. He was a man who loved branded shoes and watches and perfume, someone who liked to be meticulously dressed whenever he stepped out of the house. They wouldn't have been able to identify him as a man with a charming smile and infectious laugh, as someone who was the life of the party no matter where he went, someone who made friends easily, even in unlikely places. There's so much about Mansoor as a person who was on this earth just for 49 years that I cannot write all of it here. We'd been married for 24 years, and I had known him before that, but not as well as I got to know him after we got married. Despite his love for luxury, he was a simple man. He didn't think too deeply about anything, and he loved simply and openly. He accompanied me to several literature festivals, not because he was a literature enthusiast, considering he hadn't read a single book of mine, but because it was a nice experience for him. Initially, I used to feel awkward getting on stage, knowing he was in the audience, but soon I became used to it, and it would be great to look down and see him among the many people. When I think back to those hospital days, I think of the way the doctors would give us the news about him. To them, he was just another patient who went on to become just another casualty. But to us, he was the fun parent to two boys, the exasperating partner to a harried wife, the indulgent son to an indulgent mother, the wise, all knowing older brother to two siblings, the shy son in law to my mother. To us, he was everything.
Yeah, please. Further or?
I think for now we can talk and I'll have that section later.
So I have to say this book by Andalib is very vivid and it is very moving also, given the subject as well. So each chapter is very brief. So I just wanted to ask, yeah? So I wanted to ask you, like, did you plan this poignant narration or it happened organically? You know, like morning you would wake up to an empty room and you thought, okay, let me write a page or two and this is it.
So this has been the most difficult book for me to write, mostly because of how personal it was and how it is, and how close I am to the subject matter. So when I'm writing fiction, I'm able to compartmentalize and I'm able to, like, write that this is all. I mean, I know it's fiction. I know that I am the creator of the world. So I'm the puppet master. I pull the strings. But when it comes to something like this, it was not at all easy. So the chapters are brief because that's all I could write. I couldn't push myself to write more. Overall, the entire process of writing this book was rather difficult for me because I'm someone who writes fiction very easily. So, and to focus on my own life and to bring aspects of it here, to decide what to keep and what to write was not easy. So there were always some, it took me like nearly 2 years to write such a small book. So I think it's not so much about the length, but about what went into writing it, which kind of, was important for me.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask that because Andalib has written 50 novels in 15 years. And this is the 50th novel. And that is what I wanted to know, like, how different were the other 49? And how challenging was this 50th?
So the other 49 books were, they were at different stages of exasperation and fun, and also the happiness of accomplishing something. So for me, writing is, I treat my writing like a job. So for me, writing is something I do regardless of whether I have to or not. But this was a book that I was, there were times when I felt very self-indulgent when writing it, because I was thinking, like, why do I need to write this book? Why do I need to put this down? But it was, as I kind of figured out later, after I had written it, after I published it, that a lot of us, our community, not community, our society doesn't really give space for grief. There's always a focus on move on to the next, because grief makes people uncomfortable. It makes people, they feel like it's contagious. So they don't want to think about, maybe not literally, but I think it makes people uncomfortable, and we don't want to acknowledge what's uncomfortable. So we want to push it under, we don't want to talk about it. We want to think about happy times. I think even in the initial days after my husband passed away, and of course I was depressed, I had a cousin, message me saying, "Are you still feeling low?" I am like, what do you mean? My whole life has changed. I cannot just, it's not a switch. I can't switch on and off. I can't feel, okay, happy now. So those are things that, in that way, writing this 50th book was definitely very challenging. And again, it was something that I realized after I wrote, that as a writer, this is how I process my emotions, by writing them down. And this could have just been a diary also, I thought. I in fact told my editor, Sudeshna, what's the point of me writing this book? How is it going to, make a difference in the world? This could just be a diary I could have kept for myself. And she said, no, it's important that others also read it. And what I realized in the days after it was published was people who reached out to me saying that reading me talking about my grief, gave them also the language to talk about their grief, because that's how we are conditioned, right? We don't want to talk about it. We want to, like, push it away. For me, it was also very important that as I talked about the section I read out, where I talked about the way the doctors treated him, which I'm not blaming them. They were inundated with patients, but to them he was just another patient, and overall he was just another statistic. And for me, it became something of an issue that I wanted to make sure that he did not remain just a statistic. That I wanted, he had so many dreams and he had so many plans. So it was important for me that some of it was, saved for posterity. And for me, it made sense that it happened only through a book.
So at any stage, did you feel that thing, like what will people say? That she's not grieving and she's rather searching for fodder, in her tragedy as a writer. So because you also write about taking some kind of validation from your brother, and he said, no, it's not at all weird, and please go ahead and do what makes you happy.
So this is actually, like, right, I think after he passed away, and I was in my period of mourning, which is called Iddat. And I felt very restless, and I felt like I wanted to write. I wanted to get back to writing. I wanted to get back to writing fiction. And but I also felt like this is not how someone who is in mourning is supposed to behave. You're not supposed to be, getting back to, because for me, writing was a way of reclaiming that some small bit of normalcy in my life. So I kind of asked my brother, because he'd come to see me, and we were staying in the same house, but he was just, like, checking in on me. So I told him, look, I feel like I want to start writing again. And don't you think it's weird? Don't you think it's like, I mean, I feel, there is this idea of how someone who is in mourning is supposed to look like, how they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to be. And I wasn't any of those things. And I told him, is it okay? Like, validation in the sense, I also just felt like I had to ask someone who would give me an honest answer, and not something like, my mother wouldn't understand. She's not a reader as such. But so my brother, when I asked him, he said, you should absolutely do whatever makes you feel like, better. And don't think about the, whether this is the right time or the wrong time. So that certainly helped.
You talked about, how our society is conditioned not to acknowledge grief. So, and there's this nice thing you've written in the book about how you understood your mother 30 years later. Like, you lost your father when you were 12 years old, and you saw your mother crying, and you were very uncomfortable. There was a sense of discomfort. So now, when, as a mother, your children's father passed away, what were the emotions? Like, did you think of that, and were you able to connect?
So when my father passed away, it was all very immediate. And for me, I was not able to think of my mother's grief. For me, it was all about me. I lost my father. I don't know. At 12, I think you're very young and, very self-absorbed to think about what this means for my mother, who's lost a life partner when she's only 32 years old. It didn't make any sense to me. I was just thinking, I've lost my father. And over the years, as I grew older and I saw her, the way she, the way she brought us up, and whatever she has done, I mean, subconsciously, I absorbed all that strength from her, all that, understanding of how you move on and, deal with day-to-day things. But there was something at the back of my mind which always made me, it reminded me of how she'd been in the immediate aftermath of my father's death. And I used to tell myself, if ever something like this happens to me, this is not how I'm going to react. I'm going to be very normal about it. I mean, I don't think I'm going to go, break down like this, or, go into pieces like this. And I didn't think of this in a very denigratory way. It was just a very logical way of thinking for me. I'm a very logical person, even though I'm emotional. But I also felt that, for for people from, generation from my mother's generation, their entire lives revolve around their husbands, their families. And I was like, no, I have a life outside of that. That was what I was trying to say. What I was thinking, that I have a life outside of this, that, even if something were to happen, I shouldn't be, I mean, I will not go down that rabbit hole. But I think in the immediate, after my husband passed away, and I realized that it doesn't matter whether you're educated, whether you have a job, whether you know how thing. It doesn't matter when there is this sort of a pain that you can't. It doesn't make a difference, whether my husband was the center of my universe or not. He was not the center of my universe in the same way as my father was for my mother. But it's still it still hurt so much. So that was one of the reasons why, I wrote this. And reading this, I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me that it's managed to convey things to, gave them the words to process their own grief, which was not an intended result for me. I just wrote it for myself, but I'm glad that it's helped people.
Some of the pages really teared me up also because you talk about how year after year, the months of May and June used to be the celebratory months. And but 2021 May, I think your son first fell ill during Ramzan. And 5th of May, when you and your mother-in-law were admitted, that was the day of your engagement in 1996. And you were only 19 years old when you got engaged to 18 years old when you got engaged to Mansoor. And, these kind of, and then you also talk about how when you go back to the house, you are not able to make the Eid biryani like the way you did together. So I wanted to ask you about, processing these emotions. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, the grief is so intense. And yet you were kind of shuttling around 2 hospitals where you were admitted, your mom-in-law was there, your husband was in another hospital, your son was at home. So how did you kind of, held yourself together and process everything? And at the same time, at the back of your mind, you're also thinking about perhaps writing.
No, I think in those days I wasn't thinking so much about writing because there was no time, so like I had to go from this hospital to that hospital to check on them, and in between come back to my mother's house. So there was, I think why I was able to do it was because I really wasn't thinking, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't processing, I was just doing things because there was nothing else you can do, because no doctors were willing to say, whether they're going to improve. In fact, every time we spoke to them, the only, we're so used to, I think what COVID really changed is how doctors, like if someone falls ill and you go to a doctor or there's a surgery, most of the time doctors offer you hope, some hope, saying, of course, there are like whatever dangers or risks, but we'll do our best. But during that time, that absence of hope from doctors really it really messed with me, because I couldn't understand, because this is the highest authority. It's not like they were at home and not getting treatment. We were lucky enough, privileged enough to get hospital beds and access to the best healthcare. And still, if the doctors was not saying so, it just felt like, what was the point of everything? If we are all just so helpless in the face of something like this. So I really didn't have the time to process my emotions at that time. So when it was all over, it felt like, I was at the end of a race, which I'd lost, and there's nothing left to hold on to.
Yeah, it was very sad to even read that I think your mother-in-law passed away on 28th May after about 14, 15 days in the hospital. And the very next day, your husband was put on the ventilator and you couldn't even share the news with him. And I think he passed away in another 4 days' time. It must have been very visceral. And like you mentioned earlier, that you didn't want your husband or mother-in-law to become statistics. Right? You said the doctors were treating all patients as statistics, but you wanted to show them as people they were, the individuals they were.
I'm sure everyone who's sitting here has had some person who, or adjacent in their, not if directly in their life, adjacent in their life, who they've lost to COVID. If they haven't, I'm very happy for you, very fortunate. But I think what happened is 2021 was that time where so many people passed away. You literally talk to every family, and at least two people have passed away from COVID. And there was this feeling that um, I'm not alone in this, that every family is going through this. But at the same time, at the end of the day, I felt like, everyone is going through this differently and I am alone in my grief. So this was something that I felt rather strongly about. And it so happened that Kanishka, who's my agent, he'd asked me to write a piece in Scroll in 2021. He asked if I was open to writing something about my whole thing, So I wrote a piece which was published in, I think, July 2021. And it kind of got a lot of attention. A lot of people read it. A lot of people reached out to me. And it made me think that maybe I can write something longer. And that was when the idea started. But then I seriously started writing it only in 2022, and I managed to finish it. I think it took me 2 years to write this because I wasn't writing it continuously. The thing is, I write so much, I'm so prolific, is because I write, when I'm writing a book, I'm very particular about writing it, finishing, maybe a chapter a day or something. And so that way I finished writing a book very fast. But this was something where writing one chapter and I would put away the manuscript thinking I'm done for maybe 2 months. So that's why it took me so long. And then I had to come back and again go through it. And it was like reliving the whole thing again. In fact, I haven't read the book because the last time I read it was just during the edits. I haven't read it in this form. I find it too painful to read it myself. So I'm like, I'm finding it painful, but I'm letting the world read it. So, I feel like I'm passing on some of my pain to you guys. Maybe, the shared burden, and it helps. So people talking about it definitely helps. I mean, my husband was such a larger than life personality. It just felt so unfair that, only our family could, I mean, he would accompany me to lit fests and so many places. And, he enjoyed life. He was someone who really enjoyed life. So it's very unfair that, he got just snapped away like that. So that was why I kind of thought that, I kind of need it. So it's not just about him also. It's also me processing my grief from losing my father when I was 12 and all that. So
Yeah, it's an iron, like we all feel that, okay, it's happening all around us, everybody's suffering, we are not alone, and still deep down, we are so alone. And there were occasions when you felt that, yes, you're losing the race. But even in that, those times of depression or anxiety, you kept your faith.
faith was very important for me. It's not like something that appeared to me suddenly, or it's been there and it's continuous. So for me, faith in a higher being, in Allah, is something that it's part of who I am. So it's nothing that it didn't change or anything. It's part of who we are, as the way we've been brought up in our families. So everything is. I don't want to get into that too much right now, but that's just how. If you mean by faith, religious faith, or are you talking about faith
Yeah,
in
hope,
humanity or hope?
delve
Or,
into
okay.
hope.
Yeah. So faith, I think, is for me, I think the question is what else to do. What else can we possibly do? There's nothing. We can continue to stay fixed in the past. The other option is, who does it help? I have a family, I have kids to take care of. I have, as much as it feels weird, I have a life to live even after him. So life just goes on.
So you've also written about your coping mechanisms, so even now, I think when you go for morning walks, you listen to those Mansoor's favorite Tamil songs, or this little space that he had built for himself in your balcony in your house, which you converted into your writing space and personal space, so that you feel his presence around. You visited Malaysia because it was his favorite place. So these are all coping mechanisms, and you have dedicated quite a few pages to that. If you could talk on that.
So I didn't think of them as actively as being coping mechanisms, because I was just thinking that, this is how life is and this is how we live it. He built this space, office space sort of thing for himself in the balcony of our house. And it was just lying there unused. And when I went and sat there, initially it was with a bit of anger at him that, he built this and he's gone. So I felt like, I felt like, okay, someone should use it. It was a little difficult to sit over there and work, but I think I might have written some 5, 6 books at least sitting over there. So it was not easy. Malaysia was happened very, like, what happened, we visited Malaysia, which what I've mentioned in the book is because my brother was planning to relocate there and he wanted to go and see the city that he was visiting. And I thought, let's also go, because we haven't had a vacation in I don't even remember how long. And previous year was so traumatic for all of us. We all deserve a break. So, but then, going back over there kind of reminded me, especially Kuala Lumpur, reminded me so much of all the places that he'd taken us to. And it was weird being there without him, which kind of became a template for my life going forward, whatever I'm doing without him.
So even reconciliation is a struggle. And you mentioned about, when your period of mourning got over, and for the first time, maybe you went into a kitchen and unmindfully you poured 3 cups of water to make tea. And then this title which says learning to make tea for one. So
that was something, so tea time was a time where, I mean, everyone's house, they have their own traditions, they have their own rituals. So we didn't have any ritual as such, tea was, I would make it because my mother-in-law's tea would be too watery, he would say. Just an excuse for me to go and make tea, So both of them would sit and I would make tea, and I wouldn't even sit with them to drink it, I would take my tea to my room and I'll be busy working. They'd sit in the balcony, drinking, chatting, talking. So it was just something that, came to me like muscle memory. So when you're pouring, in my mind, the first time I actually did it, I counted out 1 for me, 1 for Mansoor, 1 for, and then I stopped. So I realized that, okay, this is never going to happen. It's going to be just 1 for me now. So that's where this, it didn't happen like organically, like, okay, I'll write a book and call it this. It was just something that stayed in my mind, that of the many things that we do, of the many ways that grief has changed my life, this is a very small but also significant way.
So, there are moments when you have broken down, when you have cried on your own, and but you also, I think, at some level had the satisfaction that both your sons, and one of them is here with us today, they have become more fond of each other. They have grown closer to each other after their father's death. And you felt that, who's with me? Like, I am all alone. And your children said, no, they are there for you. So that emotion comes very beautifully in the pages, yeah.
We've kind of become a 3-member, with 3 of us are like 3 bachelors now, So we were living together. It's like that only, 3 of us. We don't feel like, only when they need something like, say, money or something, then they remember I'm their mother, Otherwise, and we have like a 3-member WhatsApp group. We have a 3-member Instagram group where we share memes and all that. So our relationship with each other has changed. It's evolved a lot, but I also like it. I like the way things are. I don't know. We'll never know what it was like, what it would have been like if, Mansoor was here. If, it's just the way it is. So, I try not to think too much about those things, because again, it kind of bogs me down. So that I think one of the reasons for writing this book is to put all of that over here and, put it aside and not think about it too much.
Digressing a bit, do you think there is some kind of a gender differentiation in tackling grief? Men and women would react differently? Or
Definitely. I've mentioned it in the book also, I think men, whether they want to or not, or society kind of has made them feel that, they need someone to take care of them. They need someone to take care of the family. So when their wife dies, men get married very easily. within like a year or two, sometimes less than that, and like, so wives are very replaceable. Okay. But when a husband dies, I'm not saying this, I'm not criticizing that, oh, someone didn't ask me. I am not interested in getting married or anything. I'm just saying generally that, this is not at all a consideration for women. It's like, it's not at all, it never even occurs. So, that's where the whole idea, I think, it's all very internalized patriarchy. It's all very internalized thinking. No such thought at all, that it would never occur to anyone, which is again just the way it is.
Or maybe you being a writer helped.
Me being a writer just helped me vocalize it and put it down and express it. Me being a writer helped me. I mean, my life, all this unexpected changes happened, and I've had no other chance but to, like, live through it. So writing, not about this, but writing about other things really helped me channel all my angst and anxiety into something that was more tangible, more real for me. Writing this was just something like, like I said, it felt very self-indulgent. Like, why am I doing this? But I'm glad I did it, because not just because I needed to do it, but also I think my children got to see, when they read it, they got to see their father in a different light. And I also written a lot about my own childhood and, things which they didn't know, because no matter how much you tell kids, and half the time I don't think they're listening, so when I tell them, this is what happened, this is how things were. And I'm sure in their mind, they're thinking, ye phir se shuru ho gayi. So, when you've written down something, it kind of helps, it kind of stays there, so they can always go back to it.
So you said that when you started writing the book, your family wasn't aware, they didn't know. So after finishing the book, you must have sent a few copies to your family members. So the way you presented your mom-in-law and your husband, did they find something extra in that book about them, their personality? How did you make them? They were the real characters, of course, but then for the book, how did you?
No, I think whoever read the book, they were very moved. They were very overcome with emotion. Mostly because, again, this is not something that you normally come across. Everyone's gone through some period of, loss in their lives, and they all have different ways of dealing with it. And my way of dealing with it has somehow, I've subjected everyone else to it now. So, they haven't really, they didn't feel anything off. They kind of really liked it. They enjoyed reading it. Someone asked me, why did I do this? You've made yourself vulnerable by putting out yourself like this. And I said, this is the only way I know how to deal with my emotions. And I wanted to do this. So here we are.
You very categorically said about this thing about moving on. You said, no, I mean, if I want to remain stuck to this situation, I will, and I'll deal it my way. But then, when I hear you talk, when I read your book, I really feel that you have moved on very beautifully, very gracefully, very boldly. And so what do you have to say about that?
I don't know. I don't think I don't think of consider it as moving on as such. It's just, living life. I mean, that's what I think it is. I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's anything more that you can do. I mean, there are people who are stuck in their grief. And one thing that I've learned is not to be judgmental of people, and that this is how someone else deals with it. This is how I deal with it. For me, I just think of it as living my life each day as it comes, and not really thinking of the past or how this was, because I mean, I do get into bouts of depression, which becomes very difficult to get out of that. And there are times when life feels entirely hopeless, and I think you just have to accept changes in life, and that's the way I've been dealing with it.
So more books are coming?
Yeah, more books are coming. There's a small part I'd like to read out. Shall I?
Yeah,
more books. I have a book out this year with HarperCollins. It's called So interestingly, that's also a book on grief. It's fiction. It's about three cousins meeting at their grandmother's funeral and how they deal with the aftermath of their grandmother's death. So this is just a small section I'd like to read out to end this session. It's called He Always Came Back. Zindagi badi honi chahiye, lambi nahi. These are the famous words by Rajesh Khanna in Anand, immortalized on screen, but I'm quite sure that those whose zindagi was cut short would heartily disagree. It's all well and good to have characters say these dialogues on screen about people who have gone too early because it makes us feel better. We can then stop feeling bad about continuing to live our average lives while telling ourselves that those who died young had lived better. But the truth is that in the short time that they were with us, they too lived ordinary lives and had ordinary problems. No one knew they were going to go early, but I constantly think back to the people in my life who went away too soon. I think of what they have missed so far and what milestones they'll continue to miss in the years to come. And it makes me mad whenever people console me that they lived a great life. So it's okay they had to go early. It's never okay.
Yeah, we'll take the question. Finish with it.
Thank you.
Are we open to questions? Yeah, please.
Hi, I think I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much for writing the book. This is not a question. I'm sorry if I'm wasting time, but I'll just take a minute to tell something very important to her. So I lost my dad last year in July, and I went into a rabbit hole of reading so many books on loss and grief. And I think death is just one particular event, but the loss that comes afterward is something that we carry probably till the rest of our life, right? And the doubt you had, especially while writing this book, if it's self-indulgent, I don't think at all, because you really gave voice to a lot of my morbid thoughts. And if I have to quote just one particular thing from the book, I think there was a time when you thought, when he was lying in a very uncomfortable place, like how was it okay for you to lie very comfortably on a soft bed, right? And these are very morbid thoughts. And like you said, we are a very grief illiterate society. And more than moving on, I think the only thing that makes sense with grief and loss is moving forward. And I think your book is a fantastic language to that. And I thank you so much for writing it. And I'm really honored to meet you here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think you did mention that this was a very common feedback you were receiving from a lot of readers, that how they are now able to express their grief.
Thank you for writing this important book. I would like to, you were telling that you were facing bouts of depression in your life. Did you try therapy, or if not, why you didn't?
I spoke to a grief counselor in the early days, and after that I didn't think about therapy. I didn't even label it as depression. There were certain moments where suddenly I knew that I could normally bounce back quite easily from feeling sad, but there were certain days when it was just not happen that easily. So those days, do come upon me suddenly, but I haven't really considered therapy seriously. So no.
And that was a valid question, actually. Yes, thank you for asking.
Excuse me. Over here, like am I audible? Okay. So it is said that sorrow finds its way back to us. Though we think we have healed or moved on a random evening or a morning, we would get those glimpses. So what is your take on it and how do you overcome it?
I didn't understand you. I'm sorry.
Could you repeat your question, please?
It is said that sorrows will take its lead back to us. Though we think we have healed and moved on, it comes on a random day, the glimpses and the memories we had. So, what is your take on it, and how do you handle it when it comes? Like
Sorrow
the random
hits you
memories with
randomly,
flashes.
basically. So how do you?
I think it's very important to not ignore those moments, and to feel those feelings as horrible as they are. There is a part I've mentioned in the book where I couldn't stop crying much later, like a year later. So, as much as it's the most horrible thing to actually feel your feelings and not to drown them in something else, not to, escape into something else. But feeling your feelings does help. After a certain, I mean, this is a very subjective way, so I don't know. It's not one thing works for all, so I don't know if I answered your question.
Can I? During this process of grief and sorrow, how do you handle your regular life, work, and family, those stuff? Because those also a priority for us.
So, as much as I like compartmentalization, all of it is together, right? So there is no such thing that, I mean, I remember reading this joke about this person who had a fixed time to cry. I mean, that would be really great if, if you could say, okay, every day 3:30, I'm going to cry. So, that will be, I mean, if that worked, wonderful. But life goes on together and not in silos. So we have to just learn to live together through it all. So sometimes if you're cooking and you're crying, it's just who it is. It's just what it is. So, I mean, there is no process as such. I'm certainly no expert at it. So,
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a doctor. I'd like to refer to the initial section that you read out. Especially, I can understand that death, that being a very difficult part, especially on the patients, and also a little bit on the doctors on how it gets accumulated over years and time. I see that like in our system, we don't have a regularized system of teaching doctors how to console or how to counsel the patients on that, as well as what are the ways we can deal with it ourselves. In that way, I can see that during COVID, especially, it would have been way more complex for everyone, and especially for you. There might have been certain things that you might have wanted to hear, or different things what were missing. I think there should be a dialogue. So, what do you think would have been nicer, or would have helped a little bit? I think this dialogue would be beneficial.
I totally understand it why doctors didn't want to give false hope, But sometimes when there's nothing else and hope is the only thing keeping you tethered, and that is also not given. I mean, I don't blame them. They were inundated day in, day out, and we had those counseling sessions, which eventually, each time I would go inside, I would come out crying because he was just saying that there is nothing happening, we can't do anything, and he's going to go on the ventilator. So I didn't see the point of these counseling sessions. I just wanted to be left alone for some time, So I don't blame the doctors. It was just a horrible time for everyone, and it was just not. It was very unfortunate that I mean, there were a couple of doctors I absolutely hated, so I couldn't look at them. And also, if I see them today, I won't recognize them because they were all wearing masks. So, I mean, if I pass on the way or something, better not pass in front of me.
But you are a doctor, I think not just COVID times, even during regular times, I don't think doctors really have the art of breaking the news, or they don't really know how to console the caretaker or the family or the attendant who are with them. They can't afford to.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. I walked a couple of minutes late. I would love to know what's the name of your book. I would love to read it.
Learning to make tea for one.
Learning to make tea for one. That's beautiful. And I'm a medico as well. And as Soma ma'am said, she's kind of right. Doctors do need to learn how to counsel and be a bit more empathetic and understand the patients and their relatives' emotions and such. And when you said that you didn't know if writing this would make a difference, I would love to emphasize this point here right now to all artists, to all creators, everyone, to every human being. Just the existence of you and all of us makes a difference.
Thank you so much.
We should
Thank
not
you.
hesitate to put out our work and express ourselves.
Thank you.
I have one question, ma'am. Do you think this grief is majorly because of attachment, or is attachment a major part of love? I mean, this is very philosophical and spiritual, I would say, but
I mean, if you weren't attached, then why would you grieve, right? If you weren't close. So, I mean, it is definitely because of that. And, I mean, I was, like I said, I didn't think my husband was the center of my universe, and still I kind of fell to pieces after he died. So definitely it's because of attachment. And, only when someone is gone, you realize the small ways in which they made your life different. They added to your life. And I think what I feel strongly is, not being able to, like, say things to him, not being able to badmouth other people to him. Like, we would bitch about people together. So there's no one who would get that. So I think those are the small things which kind of add, they seem like very small things, but it adds up to a big enough thing. So it's not the same. I can't say the same thing to my sons, they won't get it. Some old reference, some old relative, and, those are things that only we would know and we would talk about. So those are the things that that's just how it is.
is it possible to love without being attached? I mean,
What is love if not attachment? What would you even do if not,
So thank you so much, audience. You've been wonderful and
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
those questions. And I think Andalip's book is very important to read because it is not just about Andalip, but for everybody who has suffered loss and pain during COVID or otherwise. Thank you so much once again.